They say you never really know your neighbors until they try to get you arrested over smoked brisket. It started with a simple invite. After months of rotating night shifts and 10 store breaching drills, my SWAT unit finally had a weekend off, together. That never happens. So I offered up the perfect retreat, my uncle's old cabin tucked deep in the Appalachian foothills, just outside a picturesque but notoriously uptight HOA community known as Cedar Crest Pines. A half-mile off the paved road, the cabin was peaceful, private, and, most importantly, mine. I'd inherited it from my Uncle Frank, a Vietnam vet who loved fishing, black coffee, and suspiciously strong cigars. The place had been in my family since the 70s. Fully deeded, taxes paid, and never once listed as part of the HOA's jurisdiction. But that detail didn't stop her. Her name was Karen Whiteley, the self-anointed High Queen of the Cedar Crest HOA. Her reign was built on threats, citations, and thinly veiled passive aggression delivered in a voice that sounded like it drank room-temperature Chardonnay for breakfast. We weren't even part of her kingdom, but she saw smoke rising behind the tree line that weekend and assumed an enemy camp had set up. There were 8 of us that day. 8 men who had seen things most people wouldn't survive in a nightmare. Off-duty, out of uniform, but still trained to handle emergencies. I was on the grill. Hank was chopping onions. Riley was fiddling with the Bluetooth speaker trying to connect his playlist. The others were sipping beer and playing cornhole near the fire pit we built out of hand-laid stone. And then came the voice. I'll never forget it, shrill, unmistakable, echoing through the trees like a fire alarm wrapped in judgment. This is a private neighborhood gathering. You're trespassing on HOA property. I squinted through the smoke. There she was. Karen Whiteley, in all her pastel power-suited glory, standing at the edge of my gravel path like a furious church deacon. Behind her, a tiny electric golf cart idled with a yellow HOA badge taped to the windshield. In her hand? A smartphone held like a weapon, the screen already dialed to 911. At first, I laughed. I thought she was just posturing. Maybe she'd ask us to turn down the music or complain about smoke drifting onto the azaleas. But when she turned her phone toward us and shouted, "Yes, operator, I'm witnessing a possible domestic terrorist situation. Armed men, aggressive demeanor, possibly paramilitary, yes, they're near the creek, behind lot 24. That's when it hit me. She wasn't bluffing. She had no idea who we were. She thought we were intruders. In reality, she had just called the cops on the only people who should be responding to a call like that. I exchanged a glance with Marcus, our team lead and a tactical genius who once defused a hostage situation with nothing but a throw pillow and a turkey sandwich. He raised one eyebrow, then grinned. "Oh boy," he muttered, "she just made a very expensive mistake." We didn't move. We didn't yell. We didn't escalate. We just waited. 10 minutes later, we heard sirens. 3 cruisers screamed up the winding trail like they were entering a war zone. Gravel spat in every direction. One officer leapt from the vehicle, hand near his sidearm, shouting commands. "Hands where I can see them. Step away from the fire pit." I slowly turned around. Calm. Cooperative. And because I knew the officer barking at me, Detective Ron Vasquez, who'd trained with us 3 years ago during a multi-agency raid in Atlanta. He blinked. His voice wavered. Caleb? Is that you?" I gave him a nod. "Hey, Ronnie. Want a brisket sandwich?" Karen's face, watching all this from her cart, turned the color of undercooked shrimp. Ron holstered his weapon, waved off his backup, and let out a breath like he'd just defused a live grenade. Dispatch said possible armed militia. Hostile intent. I gestured around. Just a weekend retreat. Law enforcement only. That's when the others stepped forward, quiet, steady, and suddenly very recognizable to the cops on scene. Detective Ronnie's eyes scanned our group and widened as he identified each face. Sergeant Alex Cruz, Metro SWAT Sniper. Officer Dale Winston, K-9 Unit. Lieutenant Hank Dobson, bomb disposal. All legends in their own right. Karen stumbled out of her cart, phone still in hand. Are you seriously not arresting them? They're clearly violating HOA code. This is terrorism. Ron turned toward her slowly. Ma'am. Not only is this not your jurisdiction, but you just called in a fraudulent emergency report involving law enforcement officers. That's a serious offense. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Then turned a full circle like she was looking for someone, anyone, to back her up. No one came. Ron sighed. You're going to want to leave now, ma'am. And I'd strongly recommend issuing an apology. These gentlemen aren't your enemies. They're the people who respond when real danger shows up. Karen didn't say another word. She climbed into her cart, floored the gas, and veered off down the path like a deflated parade balloon. We all stood there silent for a moment, letting it sink in. Riley finally broke it. So, are we still doing karaoke tonight or what? I turned to Ron. You staying for dinner? He grinned. Only if you've still got that bourbon we buried under the deck last summer. Oh, it's waiting. But that wasn't the end of the story. Because Karen's call set off a chain of events that would drag her, and the entire HOA board, into a scandal so deep it would make the news. She didn't just embarrass herself that day. She triggered an investigation. And she had no idea what was coming next. Karen didn't show her face for the rest of that weekend, but the damage had already been done. What she saw as a quick call to enforce her authority was, in legal terms, a weaponized false report. And that meant it left a trail. You see, we weren't just barbecue buddies or off-duty cops letting off steam. We were bonded by years of tactical operations, courtroom testimony, and an instinct that clicked on like muscle memory when something felt off. And this reeked of something deeper. By Sunday evening, Riley had pulled the dispatch logs. Public record. Karen's exact words to 911 were chilling in retrospect. They're armed. I saw at least one rifle. They're acting erratic, pacing like they're about to launch an attack. They won't leave. I think they're training for something, possibly anti-government. Anti-government. Karen had just accused a group of decorated officers of plotting sedition over pulled pork and cornhole. We didn't laugh. Not anymore. Because that report didn't just bring sirens and flashing lights, it triggered a file. One that could have flagged each of us with an internal review, a temporary suspension, or worse, if not for Ronnie recognizing us. So Monday morning, we suited up, not with Kevlar and helmets, but briefcases and quiet resolve. That's when I made the call to Sergeant Heather Moore. She's a department liaison and legal analyst, but more importantly, she's Marcus's wife. And she doesn't tolerate foolishness. By noon, she had everything from body cam footage to HOA zoning maps in her inbox. By 3 p.m., she was sitting across from the Cedar Crest Pines HOA board with a look that could melt steel. I'm not here on behalf of the city, she told them. I'm here representing 8 individuals who were targeted with a knowingly false report, resulting in the unlawful deployment of emergency services and the potential endangerment of their careers. The board looked stunned. Karen wasn't present. We've received no formal complaint, stammered the treasurer, a red-faced man named Glenn who looked like he'd never missed a wine tasting. You're about to, Heather said, sliding over a legal folder thick enough to block a bullet. This contains a timeline of events, GPS logs, a copy of the 911 call, sworn witness statements, and preliminary damages estimates. And just so we're clear, this is civil. For now. They paled. But that wasn't even the best part. Because Hank, being the quiet genius that he is, had been reviewing drone footage from his cabin roof. Surveillance we installed years ago during a rash of break-ins. Guess who had been walking her poodle across the property line 2 weeks prior? Guess who had removed our private property sign from the trail entrance and dumped it behind a boulder? That's right. Karen. In full visor and HOA polo, walking with the confidence of a queen trespassing on land she didn't own. The footage even captured her muttering to herself. Going to clean up this mess once and for all. Heather reviewed it frame by frame. This isn't just harassment. She premeditated this. She deliberately tried to get law enforcement to act against people she had a vendetta against. I looked at Marcus. He nodded. Time to notify internal affairs. Now, here's where things really began to spiral. See, Karen didn't know that 3 of us were still technically under federal contract, meaning any report involving threats or terrorism pinged not just local databases, but national ones. So when she said paramilitary and anti-government, she inadvertently triggered a background sweep of herself. And the results? Let's just say Karen had a few skeletons in her HOA closet. Multiple complaints of overreach. A pending civil suit from a veteran she'd harassed over flag placement. And worst of all, a cease and desist from another neighborhood 3 towns over where she'd been kicked off a board for, wait for it, filing false code violations to pressure residents into selling. That's when Riley leaned back and said what we were all thinking. She's not just petty. She's practiced. The next day, we returned to the cabin. I wasn't going to let her take it from me. That place meant something. To my uncle. To all of us. But the moment I pulled up the gravel road, I knew something had changed. The gate was hanging open. A pile of ash smoldered where our fire pit had been. And nailed to the front porch beam in big red letters was an HOA citation. Structure in violation. This property has been flagged for forced inspection under neighborhood safety protocols. It was unsigned. But we knew who left it. Karen wasn't backing down. She was escalating. And we had no idea just how far she'd go. We gathered around what used to be the fire pit like it was a crime scene, and in many ways, it was. Ashes. Still warm. Riley crouched low, sniffed the dirt like he was back in Afghanistan. Gasoline, he muttered. Someone lit this on purpose. No one spoke for a second. Just the wind rustling through the pines and the sharp, acrid sting of burnt oak and meat grease. The pit had been solid stone. Uncle Frank built it with his bare hands. It had survived 4 decades, 6 tornado warnings, and 1 particularly rowdy bachelor party involving 3 pounds of brisket and an ill-advised bottle rocket duel. Now it was rubble. Burned, smashed, and left smoldering under a sky that suddenly felt less friendly. Karen had crossed a line. We knew it. She knew it. But more importantly, we now had enough to bury her. Hank pulled out his phone. Let's play this smart. Heather's prepping the injunction. I say we get full property documentation filed with the county clerk before she pulls something even more drastic. You think she'll go that far? I asked. He looked at me like I'd just asked if fire was hot. She already tried to get us arrested as domestic terrorists. What do you think? So we set up a plan. We called it Operation Fire Pit, partly as a joke, mostly because none of us could deal with naming things boringly. While Heather and Marcus handled legal channels, I stayed behind at the cabin with Riley and crews to reinforce security. Drones. Motion sensors. Trail cams. Cruz even installed one of his trademark hidden microphones disguised in a hummingbird feeder. In case Karen starts monologuing, he explained with a grin. It wasn't just about defending property anymore. It was about principle. By sundown, we'd rebuilt the fire pit, stone for stone. It wasn't about cooking or heat. It was a message. We're still here. And that's when it happened. Just after 10 p.m., the sensors triggered. Someone was moving down the trail. I killed the floodlight and we watched the monitors. A figure. Moving slow. Flashlight off. Hugging the trees. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hiker. It was Karen. Caught on infrared. She crept up to the cabin perimeter, paused by the rebuilt fire pit, and, this is real, pulled a folded paper out of her coat pocket. She walked to the new pit and stuffed the paper between the rocks. Then she stepped back, lit a match, and... Whoosh! A tiny burst of flame licked up from the paper. She stood there watching it burn like she was summoning some HOA demon god. Riley hit record. She muttered something. Cruz boosted the audio from the feeder mic. You think you can defy me, Frank's boy? This land belongs to the community. You'll learn. I didn't breathe. She flicked the matchstick into the pit, turned, and disappeared back into the trees. Riley slowly turned to me. She thinks she's the final boss. But this wasn't a game anymore. The next morning, we brought the footage to Heather. She watched the video, then paused it on the flame burning between the stones. I hope she enjoyed that little ritual, she said. Because this is going to be her last HOA presidency. That afternoon, Heather filed 3 reports. One with the local sheriff, detailing trespassing and attempted arson. One with the State Housing Commission, citing abuse of HOA authority. And one with the County District Attorney's Office, formally requesting an investigation into fraudulent 911 abuse and personal harassment. It was official. Karen had gone too far. But she didn't know the worst part yet. Because Cruz had found something else on her during the audio sweep. A whisper, barely caught, when she thought she was alone. Wait till you see who's on my side. That's when it hit us. Karen wasn't working alone. The clue was subtle, just a whisper on a midnight mic pickup, but it cracked everything open. Wait till you see who's on my side. Karen wasn't just a rogue HOA president with a clipboard and a vendetta. She had help. And if that help was inside the system, everything we'd done so far might have only scratched the surface. Cruz ran the voice through a spectral enhancer and isolated background noise. A phone call. It was short. Compressed. But one word stood out. Councilman. Heather's eyes narrowed. She has a government ally. Riley sat up straight. You think she's getting political cover? I think, Heather said, she's been using her position to curry favors. And someone up the chain has been letting it slide. So we started digging. Cruz traced her HOA tenure back 6 years. During that time, Cedar Crest Pines had gone from a quiet, tree-lined community to a pocket fiefdom ruled by arbitrary code and punitive fees. But more importantly, Karen's name appeared on multiple zoning recommendation forms tied to local land use decisions. And guess whose name was co-signed next to hers on each one? Councilman Frederick Hale. A man known for big development dreams and campaign dinners where wine flowed like water and HOA presidents were treated like VIP guests. We found pictures. Karen, beaming in pearls, at Hale's private fundraiser 2 months earlier. A caption in a real estate blog read, Community Liaison Karen Whiteley with Councilman Hale, discussing regional beautification goals. In other words, land grabs disguised as community improvement. It all clicked. Karen didn't just want us off the property. She wanted the property itself. And it made sense. The cabin sat just beyond the current HOA border, but the access road, the water rights, the ridge view, it was prime for development. She'd tried the friendly route. Then the legal threats. Then the fire pit incident. And now, she was planning something bigger. Something we hadn't anticipated. We needed answers. So Marcus went to City Hall posing as a contractor with a development interest. What he found was a paper trail that confirmed everything. There was a green infrastructure expansion proposal filed just 2 weeks before our barbecue weekend. It included an annexation map, one that mysteriously included my cabin's property as part of the extended community asset zone. We weren't just in her way. We were the last obstacle. But Karen had gotten cocky. She'd filed the expansion without notifying the rightful owner, me. A violation of municipal code. A big one. That night, we gathered at the cabin for a war council. Heather laid it out. She's trying to force your hand. If you leave, even temporarily, she'll file for adverse possession under the new annexation request. She wants to steal it legally? Riley asked. Exactly. But here's the twist. Councilman Hale had a weakness. 2 years ago, his office was hit with an ethics review over campaign finance irregularities. Heather still had contacts on that committee. She made one call, dropped a few breadcrumbs, and within 48 hours we had confirmation. Karen had funneled community beautification donations through the HOA's discretionary fund, then contributed a chunk directly to Hale's campaign. Boom. Quid pro quo. Documented. And we weren't the only ones angry. The HOA treasurer, Glenn, the same red-faced wine guy who'd looked like he wanted to be anywhere else during our first meeting, reached out. He wanted to talk. We met Glenn in the parking lot of a barbecue joint 2 towns over. The man was sweating before we even ordered. "I didn't know she was this far gone," he said, eyes darting. "She told us it was a cleanup effort. Said the cabin was a liability. I didn't want to sign, but?" Marcus asked. "She said if I didn't vote with her, she'd audit my backyard renovation. My wife has anxiety issues," she threatened to report our therapy gazebo as an illegal structure. I blinked. Therapy gazebo? Not the point, Glenn snapped. "Look, I brought the documents. HOA votes, meeting transcripts, fund transfers. If you take her down, I'm out. I'm done. She's unhinged." He handed us a thick manila envelope and disappeared into the night like a suburban informant in witness protection. Inside the envelope? Gold. Proof that Karen had faked quorum at 3 board votes. Reworded violations to target specific residents. Diverted over $7,000 in discretionary funds for influence meetings. Heather smiled as she flipped through the stack. "Boys," she said, "we have enough to end her. And maybe take Hale with her." But we had to act fast. Because that weekend was the community's annual summer showcase. An HOA-sponsored event hosted, where else, right in front of the cabin. And Karen had saved the keynote for herself. She was planning to announce the reclamation of the surrounding properties under new HOA jurisdiction. A speech. A banner. A media photographer. She thought she'd won. She had no idea that her whole empire was about to collapse. The morning of the Cedar Crest Pines summer showcase dawned bright and smug. You could practically feel the HOA energy humming in the air like a live wire of passive-aggressive banners and sun hats. Folding chairs lined the cul-de-sac entrance. There were signs that read "Community Progress Starts With Us" and "Beautify to Unify." And dead center on a small wooden platform with a faux gold podium, stood Karen. Her blazer was crisp. Her hair was shellacked into what can only be described as a managerial battle helmet. And taped to the front of the podium was a printed map, my cabin circled in red marker, labeled Future Site, Community Lodge. She was going to claim it. Publicly. Like a warlord planting her flag in foreign soil. "Are you ready for this?" I asked Heather as we approached the edge of the crowd. She adjusted her sunglasses. "She's not." We spread out. Me. Marcus. Cruz. Riley. Heather, front and center, camera rolling. Hank, off to the side, live streaming it all to the State Housing Commission. Glenn, the now defected treasurer, stood awkwardly by the lemonade table like a man waiting to disarm a bomb with a spork. Karen tapped the mic. "Good afternoon, neighbors." Light applause. She raised her hands, soaking in the moment like a dictator on parade. "It brings me immense joy to unveil the next chapter in Cedar Crest Pines' journey toward harmony, order, and civic excellence. Today, I announce our expansion, our bold embrace of stewardship over the surrounding natural spaces. As of this moment, your HOA is officially incorporating the ridge perimeter into our community development plan." Gasps. Some polite claps. A few confused murmurs. This includes the parcel known colloquially as the Whiteley Retreat Zone. My cabin. She renamed it after herself. I stepped forward. "Actually," I said loud enough to cut through her moment, "it's still known legally as the Franklin B. Thorne Private Estate, and I've got the paperwork to prove it." Karen blinked, smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Then it returned, weaponized. "Caleb," she said, voice sugary, "this isn't the time." "No," I interrupted, holding up a folder. "This is exactly the time." I stepped onto the platform. Karen tried to stop me, but I handed a microphone to Heather, who began reading. Per Municipal Land Registry dated 1978 and reaffirmed in 2022, Parcel 9B, Ridge Sector, remains under private ownership, free of annexation or HOA jurisdiction. The crowd murmured louder now. Whispers. Confusion. Heather continued. "Furthermore, documents submitted to the Zoning Commission under your name were fraudulently marked as community approved, when in fact quorum was never met. And the discretionary funds used to host your fundraiser at Councilman Hale's cabin, those came directly from HOA dues." Karen paled. "And before you say this is hearsay," Heather added with a slight smirk, "let's hear it from the source." Cruz hit play on a portable speaker. Karen's voice, clear as crystal, echoed across the event. "You think you can defy me, Frank's boy? This land belongs to the community. You'll learn." Then came the whisper from the feeder mic. "Wait till you see who's on my side." Now there were no claps. Just silence. Staring. Whispers turning into judgment. One elderly board member stood up. "Karen, is this true?" She stammered. "This is being taken out of context. These people have been targeting me. They're extremists. They're law enforcement," I said. "Decorated. Verified. And all off-duty when you filed a false report accusing us of terrorism." More murmurs. Heather handed the folder to the HOA's secretary. Inside is a formal injunction, a cease and desist, and an ethics complaint. If this board doesn't immediately remove Karen Whiteley from office, it will be named in a class action lawsuit representing over a dozen affected residents. Someone from the crowd shouted, "How many other properties did she try to steal?" Karen spun. "You don't understand. I was protecting this community. That cabin is a hazard. It's disorganized. It has no aesthetic unity. Neither does fraud," I said. She stared at me, eyes wide, hands shaking, as it all came crashing down. Within the hour, the board voted. Karen was removed from her position. An interim president was sworn in on the spot. The annexation paperwork was shredded in front of the entire audience. And as for Councilman Hale? By Monday morning, the story had hit local news. The headline read, "HOA President removed in scandal after filing false emergency report against SWAT officers." The subheading, "Councilman's campaign donations now under investigation." As for us, we celebrated with another barbecue at the cabin that weekend. This time, with official permits stapled to a corkboard and a dozen patrol officers who dropped by for brisket and a good laugh. Karen never came back. The fire pit? Still standing. The lesson? Don't start a war with people who know how to finish it, quietly, legally, and with enough paperwork to bury a kingdom.